Death is one of the few universal experiences that every human being will face. And yet, we still know surprisingly little about it. While philosophers, clergy, and artists have pondered for millennia what happens after death, science is also beginning to explore the topic, not through the lens of religion or emotion, but through facts, observation, and biology. In this episode of ThinkDust, we'll take a closer look at death as modern science understands it. What happens to the body? To the brain? How does the dying process unfold step by step? And is there anything that could be described as a scientific trace of consciousness after death? Prepare for a journey to the edge of life, and beyond, explained simply, but deeply. 1. When does death begin? As obvious as it sounds, death doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a process that begins when the body can no longer maintain its vital functions. From a scientific point of view, death begins with cardiac arrest. The heart stops pumping blood, and oxygen ceases to reach tissues. The brain, deprived of oxygen, begins to die first. After just 10 seconds without circulation, we lose consciousness. After 3 to 5 minutes, irreversible damage to brain cells occurs. But that doesn't mean all of you disappears at once. Parts of the body die at different rates. Some skin, kidney, or muscle cells can remain alive for several hours. So death is not a moment, it's a wave of fading systems, beginning with the brain and ending with the simplest cells. 2. What does a person feel while dying? This is one of the most frequently asked questions. Does death hurt? Are we aware of it? People who have survived cardiac arrest often describe similar experiences: a sense of peace, detachment from the body, and sometimes a light at the end of a tunnel. Is that proof of life after death? Not necessarily. Scientists believe this is the result of a dying brain's activity. In the final seconds of life, as the brain loses oxygen, intense and chaotic neural discharges may occur. This could explain the visions and feelings reported by people who were resuscitated. At the same time, the body releases endorphins, natural opioids that act as painkillers. For many dying people, especially those who die in their sleep or under palliative care, the process is surprisingly peaceful. 3. What happens to the brain? After circulation stops, the brain no longer receives oxygen and glucose, the fuel it needs to function. Within minutes, nerve cells begin to die. But it doesn't happen silently. Studies in rats and humans have shown that shortly after death, there can be a brief spike in brain activity. Some researchers have called it the last flash of consciousness. In 2022, a study was published showing the EEG of an elderly man who died during brain monitoring. The results showed increased synchronization of gamma waves, the same waves responsible for consciousness and memory. Is this evidence that the mind takes a final journey? Hard to say. But from a biological point of view, the brain doesn't shut down like a switch. It fades gradually, with brief flickers of activity. 4. Death and consciousness. Here we step into the most intriguing territory. Does consciousness vanish with brain activity, or can it persist a bit longer? Some researchers suggest that for a few minutes after death, the brain may retain functions related to the self. This means a dying person might be aware of their own death for several seconds or even a minute. Interestingly, people who have been resuscitated often report that time during those moments seemed to stretch. Some say they saw their life flash before their eyes, or were in another space. Scientific explanation. It may be the effect of oxygen deprivation, heightened brain activity, and the shutdown of the prefrontal cortex, the part that normally filters our perception. But those moments, between cardiac arrest and the fading of consciousness, remain the most mysterious. Science is only beginning to investigate them. 5. Clinical death versus biological death. It's worth distinguishing between two concepts: clinical death, cessation of heartbeat and breathing, but without irreversible brain damage. Resuscitation is still possible. Biological death, irreversible destruction of cells, especially in the brain. At this point, there is no return. It's precisely because of this distinction that thousands of people have been saved after being technically dead for several minutes before being revived. And it's from these cases that many afterlife stories come. Science doesn't reject them, it studies them more and more seriously. 6. The body after death. decay and transformation. After death, the body doesn't disappear, it undergoes a complex process of decomposition. Within minutes, rigor mortis sets in. After a few hours, autolysis begins, cells begin to digest themselves. In the following days, bacteria that once lived peacefully in the gut begin to break down the body from the inside. Gases form, skin color changes, and the body swells. This process, though brutal, is part of the natural life cycle. Decay is not an end, but a transformation. The body becomes a source of energy and matter for other organisms. 7. What does physics say? Does anything remain? Physics doesn't recognize the concept of a soul, but it does recognize energy. According to the law of conservation of energy, energy doesn't disappear, it only changes form. Can this be applied to consciousness? This is where speculation begins. Some theoretical physicists suggest that consciousness could be linked to quantum information, which may not be lost even after brain death. Sounds like science fiction, and for now, it is. But science is increasingly bold in exploring such possibilities. 8. Can consciousness survive? Theories and hypotheses. Beyond classical science, there are fringe theories. For example, Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff's theory posits that consciousness may result from quantum phenomena in the brain's microtubules. If true, the informational content of consciousness could, in theory, be released after death and persist. But there's no hard evidence yet. On the other hand, near-death experiences, NDEs, often share common features: light, a feeling of floating, the presence of others. This could point to something more, or simply a shared way the brain dies. 9. Final reflection. Death is a part of life. Death is not a malfunction. It's part of the system. Every cell in your body knows how to die. Every day, billions of cells die, so you can live. The death of a human, though painful, can also be peaceful, comprehensible, even beautiful. Science doesn't give us all the answers, but it allows us to come closer to the boundary and face it without fear. At ThinkDust, we don't run from questions. We look them in the eye, because that's the only way to truly understand who we are. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you want more questions that live in the minds of all of us, subscribe to ThinkDust, where thoughts turn to dust, but stay with you forever.